Once upon a time, there was a little girl, and her name was Red Riding Hood, because she always wore a red cloak with a big red hood. One day her mother baked some cakes and said to her, "My dear, put on your red cloak with the hood and take this cake to your granny and ask how she is." Now Little Red Riding Hood loved her granny very much, so she put on her cloak, took the cake, and left. But her grandmother lived some way off, so to reach her cottage, Red Riding Hood had to go through a thick, lonely forest. However, some woodcutters were at work in the forest. So Red Riding Hood was not so very afraid when she saw a big wolf coming towards her. And because the woodcutters were nearby, the wolf did not eat Red Riding Hood straight away, but asked her very politely, "Where are you going, Red Riding Hood?" "I'm going to see my granny and give her this cake," said Red Riding Hood. "And where does she live?" asked the wolf in his turn. "Not very far if you take this road. Her cottage is just on the edge of the forest." "But I am going by the woodland path because it is full of nuts and flowers and butterflies," replied Red Riding Hood. "I wish you good luck," said the wolf, and ran along the road which Red Riding Hood had showed him. Soon he reached the old woman's cottage and knocked at the door. The grandmother was doing something in the cottage, but she heard the knock, went to the door, and opened it. Seeing the wolf on the doorstep, she realized how big and dangerous he was, so without hesitating, she kicked the wolf as hard as she could and ran out of the cottage. The old woman went straight to Red Riding Hood's mother's house to tell her about the wolf prowling around the village. When she arrived at Red Riding Hood's house and told her mother about the wolf, the mother grew very worried, since her daughter was just going through that very forest to that very place where the grandmother had met the wolf. And the wolf, who was very hungry and had missed his dinner again, made up his mind to stay in the cottage and wait for Red Riding Hood. So he shut the door, put on Granny's nightcap, and got into her bed. Meanwhile, Red Riding Hood reached her grandmother's cottage safely and knocked at the door. "Who is there?" said the wolf, making his voice as soft as he could. "Red Riding Hood with a cake from my mother," said the girl. "Open the door and come in, my dear," said the wolf, lying in Granny's bed. So Red Riding Hood opened the door and went in. The cottage was so dark that she thought it was her grandmother in bed feeling unwell. So Red Riding Hood took off her cloak and went over to her grandmother's bed. "Oh, Granny, Granny, what big arms you've got," said the girl. "All the better to hug you with," said the wolf. "But Granny, Granny, what big ears you have," said the girl again. "All the better to hear you with," said the wolf, waiting for her to come closer. But Red Riding Hood was a bit surprised, so she tried to see her granny better. "Oh, Granny, Granny, what big teeth you've got!" exclaimed the girl, and jumped away. "All the better to eat you with," growled the wolf, ready to rush at Red Riding Hood. and eat her. But Red Riding Hood started crying so loudly that a woodcutter who was working nearby came swiftly to the cottage and caught the hungry wolf. Red Riding Hood, thinking that the wolf had eaten her grandmother, ran back to her mother's house as fast as she could, and can you imagine how happy she was to see her granny safe and sound in her mother's house? And can you imagine how happy her grandmother and mother were to see their dearest little Red Riding Hood?